So once again, welcome friends. We are recording, but that is simply because some people are really interested in this conversation, and we're going to share that internally, as well as the intention to have it external. If for some reason you would like to share something that you would not like to be on the recording, let us know and we'll just turn it off, because we want this to be honest and want you to feel free to share. Also, we recognize that for many of us, it is our lunch break. And so please do feel free to enjoy your lunch as we are having a conversation. Because this is friendly and exciting times for us in the Inland Empire as we continue to collaborate on so many different things. In particular, wanted to just highlight for those who just joined that we do have the recordings posted on the GIA podcast website link. I don't know why, but that felt like a mouthful. And you can check out the recordings of the segmented conversations, right? So we had some really great insights from Yvonne when she's interviewed students and shared out some of her findings. Sorrel shared about some of the capacity work that's been happening behind the scenes with GIA that you may find interesting for a forthcoming report. And of course, our partners within the four-year universities, the two-year community colleges, and the K-12 space sharing some of their thoughts on enrollment. And so really hope that you take a chance to listen if you haven't already. Many of the recording participants shared the importance of intersegmental collaboration. So collaboration between partners. And as many of you know, GIA, this is something that we strive for, because unfortunately we get in our silos and focused on our day-to-day work, but really being able to collaborate across partnerships is super important. And so many of them, I was just commenting to Emily and Rachel actually that theirs was like we just entered in their living room, right? And had a quick thought about this is where we're at and how we continue these partnerships. And so today's conversation is more about some of those actions that we want to move forward with. And so I'm really curious from some of you, and I won't be afraid to, use my teacher hat, put on my teacher hat and call on you, but I don't have to if you don't want me to find out, what do you think are some of the most critical things and or needs you have from the other segments? How do you think about this intersegmental collaboration? Many of you, actually, all of you mentioned more or better data sharing as one of the ideas. But so we don't get focused on any one particular thing, would love to hear about what else you think is really important to share with these groups as we're addressing these regional enrollment challenges. Feel free to come on mute if you'd like to go first. Break the ice.
Well, we know I'm not shy, so I'll jump in. Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel Deach. I'm the Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management here at Cal State San Bernardino. Lovely to be in conversation with you all today. You asked this question, Marie, and it's funny because I think Emily and I had a conversation. This has always been a part of our piece, like how do we better collaborate? How do we better share? But I think one of the things that I know is a challenge, and I think is a challenge for all of us, is around how we communicate to the student. Right. I think we all know that students don't read email. They don't really want to be text messaged from us. Like, I'm not getting on TikTok. Somebody else might get on TikTok, but that's not going to be me. Like, how do we be in space? And I think that's actually a really amazing opportunity, because I think it goes along with data sharing is communication sharing, because I feel like we get, rightly so, very protective of the students we serve and very hesitant to share things across. But I think if we're going to continue to really raise the region, right? And I actually was in a space yesterday where I was talking about how this group and this work that GIA does, and I think our partners at One Future Coachella Valley do, is really about thinking about it as a whole. And so how do we continue that thinking when we're likely to say we don't want to share those things? And so I think for me, that's one of the things that, as I'm continuing to think about this space, is something that I'd love for us to continue to tackle.
Thank you, Rachel, reminding us about how we reach out to our students and what that communication looks like, continuing to bring that focus in. Others have thoughts on how we are addressing these enrollment challenges through collaboration, or how we should?
I think I'll go next. Olivia Rosas, Vice President of Student Services at San Bernardino Valley College. And I think, it's really, this pandemic has taught us to really be reflective and to really show compassion for our students who are really experiencing trauma. I think being more intentional, but not necessarily just by saying, but by doing, and reflecting on our policies and practices to determine, are we part of the problem? Are institutions, having students go through hurdles, unnecessary, hurdles that are preventing them from continuing or from re-engaging? And a lot of students have left us. And we need to bring them back, to everything that we can to, again, demonstrate that we are here, that we need to show a sense of caring, for them, and just really be intentional in our actions.
Thank you, Olivia. You're getting some applause. Thank you for using your reactions too. I appreciate that, Yvonne. Others have thoughts on what do we see as some of the critical needs when we're in collaboration with each other that we can work on to then continue to move forward in this space?
Well, one of the things that Olivia mentioned that I just want to kind of expand on is that the concept that she said, are we part of the problem? Are we in higher ed? Are we putting barriers in place for students that that somehow we could work together more intersegmentally to break down some of those barriers? And and I think about some of the work that Rachel and I have done in partnership together, and ways that we can scale some of those things and just think differently. And it all goes back to a piece that Rachel was talking about in terms of us always being very, very protective, rightly so, of our student data and information, and being very thoughtful about what we're sharing with other segments or other institutions. But if we're doing this in service of students to make their lives easier, I think we need to think differently about what we're doing. And are we really protecting the student, or are we making things more difficult for them? And I think looking at ways to, what are those pieces that if we were able to create opportunities for better collaboration between all of our segments, to take the burden off of the student as they're looking to matriculate to one of our institutions.
It makes you wonder what would happen if we were radically transparent in how we work with students and how we're connected to one another. I mean, I think we do talk silos, right? We talk silos, that there's the Cal State system, and there's the community college system, and there's the UC system, and then there's the private schools that are in the area. And yet all of us are interconnected in the way students swirl and move between our institutions. And we're all connected by the K-12 pipeline. Like we are all serving and looking and connected to those same group of students, yet we don't promote any sort of radical transparency in the work that we're doing. And so how do we think about that as a totally different frame, and coming at it from the student-centered space as opposed to coming at it from an institutional-centered space? We talk a lot, I think, across our institutions about being student-centered in our work, but yet we have barriers, administrative barriers often, that are not. And so rethinking those spaces.
Rachel, that brings up a really good point that I was thinking about, given what several of you have shared already, is really about, what would a couple things that the K-12 and post-secondary space could collaborate on right now to think about how we help our students to enroll and move their educational journey forward, right? Because this crisis, really, when you think about it, it's being brought up because all of our institutions, have, let's be honest, need to pay the bills, right? But really, we think about it, it's students that we've lost, that are not here. What's going on? Where are they? What can we do to help to support them and continue this work? I know we have several folks from the K-12 space too on this call, and I'm curious if, not that I'm going to call them out, but I could, I suppose, to put them on the spot, but also from our post-secondary partners, who are collaborating, I know, with some of the K-12 space. What are some of the bright spots that you're seeing, or things that we then can follow up on to work on further as a collaborative, moving this work forward?
So Jorge Perez work at Riverside Unified K-12 Systems. And so one of the pieces in my role here is college and career readiness, but it's really just the articulation, a commonality across the board. And so you're correct, we're losing a lot of our students due to the pandemic. A lot of them we're working overtime to try and connect them back to their school, to the normalcy as we transition back into our schools. But it kind of, it puts another barrier to when we have to work with students and encourage them to, pick up where they left off, enrolling in dual enrollment courses, concurrent enrollment courses, but having an unknown, right? Do those courses then fulfill this graduation requirement? Do those courses then fulfill this A through G requirement? Do those courses then apply towards, their bachelor's degree and so forth? And so I know years ago, and I touched this on previous meetings, but it's really the A through G for community colleges. That needs to be updated, be able to have something equivalent to that for also the University of California and Cal States and many of our privates. The other piece too is when we're looking at assisting our students, and I say we as a whole, that's teachers, right? Your college prep teachers, like AVID teachers, CTE teachers, when we talk about counselors working with them, and even community organizations trying to offer workshops, we have such a big difference between the Cal State application and making sure that we address them, and then the UC application. And so they're starting to kind of come together in the sense of a time frame that's very helpful. So now we can address them all in a certain time frame, but almost like a common application. And I know that already exists for the privates, but something that'd be very similar that could allow us then to be able to, as we hit them once, we don't have to come back to them and try and then get them to, on another given day, do a different application for a different system, right? And so something that maybe our educational partners, in higher ed could kind of come together and be able to provide us a one-stop shop equivalent to applying to these colleges, deadlines equivalent to, many pieces such as housing and financial aid. And it becomes, I think, very difficult to, just when we captured a kid in our classrooms, in our offices as counselors, then to have to call that kid back in again at a later time and trying to convince the parent not to apply to a different system or encourage them to do this other thing. So just that commonality across, I think, our different levels would be great, very helpful for us at K-12.
Thank you, Jorge. And I did notice you got a couple applause reactions on that one. Wouldn't that be one of the coolest things we could do for our students in the state of California? Given that there is, the work happening now to have finally a longitudinal data system, and much of that system is being based on the CCGI or California College Guidance Initiative work. I actually am hopeful that that is something that maybe we can see in some way, at least to really support students. I don't know if others on the call have more thoughts of that. I know for many years we had talked about it and it was like, yeah, that would be cool, but I don't know. But I'm feeling a bit more hopeful as these collaborative types of conversations continue, and that there are pushes across the state to have some of those collaborations actually happen and things occur from it. So, I think that's something that we can add as GIA, at least, to our list of how could we help support to make something like that a reality, and what would that reality really look like that would be in service of students and not in service of the institutions, to make it useful for them. I don't know if others have thoughts on either that or the follow-up question on other things in the K-12 space that would be good to collaborate on.
It's more like I'm wondering, it's more like something I've been wondering as we're looking at our data countywide with our districts. We're getting things we hadn't seen before, like with the student tracker. I can tell you that we're getting really close to 50% are, meeting the A through G requirements, which means they're eligible to go to a 4-year. And then you look at the number of students who actually enroll in a 4-year, and there's a huge gap, and so it just kind of makes me wonder, what are the things, we're saying that they're prepared and ready, and yet what's keeping them from taking that next step that, so many of our students don't get into that 4-year setting, even though they're qualified to. And again, half is still, I think we're still not meeting the needs of half of our students, which is the other thing I wonder a lot, good for that half. What about the other half? But even this within that one half, so that's just something I was wondering, when you look at the numbers, you kind of have to wonder why. And many of you kind of know some of the reasons. And obviously COVID has turned a lot of things on its head, but this was even before that. And so again, I don't have the answer. I don't expect you guys to have the answer, but it sure would be nice if we kind of did, wouldn't it? Thank you.
Thank you, John. TL, I do see your hand, but let me see if anyone has any comments back to John on his question. Emily?
Well, one of the things that I see, because we do, this isn't going to be a big shock to anyone. It's not earth-shattering news, but we do, every year, we do a positive and negative SIR survey. So when students submit their statement of intent to register. So we do a survey of students who positively SIR'd, and then those that didn't, to kind of get like, what's going on? Why did you decide not to come after getting an offer of admission to UCR? And obviously, one reason is because we're not the only 4-year institution out there, and they're deciding to go other places. But a big piece of it is the financial piece, and not understanding their financial aid package, not understanding the difference between net cost versus what the sticker price looks like. And so, I really do think that there is a lot more work that we can be doing around educating students around financial aid, financial literacy, understanding what net cost is, understanding what it means to be able to get out in 4 years, and what that means for you personally to be able to stop paying tuition and start earning money. And so I think that's a big piece that I think if we had a regional approach to this with our students in the Inland Empire, we can make a big difference.
Thank you, Emily. TL, you had your hand up?
Well, I'm not an administrator. I'm just faculty. So I have the privilege to dream big and not worry about the details. So I'm going to present my big dream of how it should work from my perspective. When a student is a freshman in the K-12 system, that student is by default registered with the California Public Education System, which includes K-12, community colleges, CSUs, and UCs. That student is in the system. And especially if we have zero tuition and zero textbook costs, which I think we can and should work on, then that student is already in the database when the student wants to take a course at Crafton Hills College, Valley College, RCC, or wherever online throughout the state of California. And then the question becomes, does that student qualify for a particular course? Does that student qualify for a particular program at UCR or Berkeley? And then you start worrying about things like dorm space and all that. But in terms of just having the student get over the barriers of registering, filling out an application here, filling out an application there, I think we don't have to have that. Let's have the default be the student is registered and in the system.
Thank you, TL, for bringing those insights in. Sipple, you had your hand up?
It's CPAL. No worries. It gets butchered.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you for correcting me. I appreciate that.
No worries. Thank you for putting this together. I work at the University of Laverne, not in admissions, but my first sort of realm of higher education experience was in admissions. And I will definitely relay this great information to my colleagues as well. But I do see Marilyn from our regional campus on here as well. So hello. So when I think about the enrollment, we'll call it an issue, I think this is really like across the nation. I think that's a fair statement to make. When you think about sort of everything that's happened with COVID, one thing that we keep hearing about is the Great Resignation, right? So many people have quit their jobs because they're looking for different careers. they realized that they no longer need to do the 9 to 5, and they were given the remote opportunity, and a lot of them want to stick with sort of what they discovered during COVID. And so I sort of think that the enrollment issue it's kind of on, not exactly on that same level, but I think that there are a lot of similarities. I have 2 nephews who actually, they were paying $40,000 to $50,000 a year at a university studying aeronautics and space engineering, and now they kind of reshifted, and this all kind of happened during COVID because the classes got reshifted, and that was a whole mess. So my point is, I think that similar to what happened with the Great Resignation with COVID, I think we sort of see that with the enrollment piece as well. Students are maybe reshifting their career goals, maybe realizing that they don't have to spend as much time in school, and they're looking maybe for shortcuts. And social media, I think, also has a huge impact as well. They do see things on TikTok and Instagram and other avenues, and I think that maybe gets them sort of distracted from the traditional views and ways of getting an education. So that's just my 2 cents with sort of what I've seen on my end.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you for speaking up. One of the great ideas that came out of a group similar to this, one of the Action Network teams, was around, how do we understand what's happening with the youth in our space? And many of you may have listened to the recording from Dr. Yvonne Olivares around some of the research she had done over the summer, talking to youth about their aspirations, or do they have aspirations for higher ed? What's going on in that space? And so, I'm thinking that she should share just a little bit of, potentially their answering of that question, but also just, some of the thoughts that she had gleaned from student input to add to this conversation.
Sure, of course. Well, one thing we learned, and we did this study over the summer, so, this is a year and a half into the pandemic, was that it was almost universal that high school students were wanting to go to college. They still saw college as the, how are you going to be successful? How am I going to get that, house that I'm imagining, my dream car, my career I'm going to have. And they talked about these careers they imagined. We didn't see a lot of the sort of apathy that we're hearing amongst adults. And now, because we really were focusing on getting a representative sample, we had a very large sample of low-income students, including extreme poverty students. So, this group of teens, their perspective isn't about changing from one fancy career to the other so much as getting out of their current situations. The thing that was the big takeaway for them, and I think that COVID is exacerbating, is that before the pandemic, these teens didn't know how to get resources. With the pandemic, everything's worse. The most common place that teens go, their number one resource, and in many cases, their only resource for college information, is the internet, which is horrible. These are all high school students. They all have counselors in their high schools that can provide them information. Many of them have CalSOAP counselors and AVID and all these other programs, yet we didn't hear any of those. Teens weren't talking about their high school counselors. I mean, we even had graduating seniors who were like, I think maybe the counselor might be able to help. I don't know. They don't know where to get this information. And so really the thing was just this lack of understanding on where they can go to get answers. The second place that they go to for information about colleges is from movies and TV. So if the stress of knowing the internet is their go-to, knowing that TV and movies is their second go-to, it was a little disconcerting.
Absolutely it is. And something for sure that I think this group and others, we will be working on for quite some time, because it is a constant struggle. It's not like, our counselors and teachers aren't doing amazing work, right? We know they are. And so how do we as others help to support them to make sure that they have what they need to do this job and reach students where they are. Olivia, earlier you had your hand up. Did you want to share something?
Yes, just kind of chime in also, related to, I think it's, we do a good job at meeting students where they are. But I think with this pandemic and what we have heard and anecdotally and through articles and literature that we've read is, we really need to be, again, intentional about meeting students where they are. And as they're retooling, just like Sipol had mentioned, as their students are looking to changing careers or going back to school or not going back to school, we need to really get our fingers, on the pulse as to how can we, as institutions, help them with retooling, with any aspirations that they may have. I know our district has been very intentional about helping students financially, because we know that that's one of the main reasons why they don't continue, they stop out or they drop out, right? So we have our Books Plus program, where they get books for free. It's a book rental program that we will continue to offer in the spring. We have provided them with some financial relief. We set up some criteria, and students have received funding or allocations both in the fall, and will continue within the spring, where we're using our HERF, funding that community college have received, all related to student needs. And then we're also providing free parking and mental health services. We have ramped up our mental health services for our students, because we know that they've suffered losses, their friends, family members, through this pandemic. And we're also in the process of forgiving student debt. Again, using institutional dollars to forgive debt for our students that enrolled from the point of where the pandemic started up until summer of 2021. So any tuition or fees that students had outstanding debt for that period of time, for those semesters, we're in the process of forgiving that debt for them, so that they can, again, try to re-engage them, if money had been a concern of theirs, and that's why they were not able to register. We're hopeful that this relief will help them to continue on.
Thank you, Olivia, for sharing that. I am hopeful that if you are doing that maybe there might be a couple other campuses who are doing similar things, but if not, these will be an area that folks can learn about, and especially I think the financial aid loan forgiveness is a big barrier for many students. Even if it's just a small, library fee, it's not small to them, right? And so we need to figure out ways to continue to embrace students where they're at. Thank you for those words, Olivia.
Yeah, and just one more thing, looking at, what are the thresholds? What is stopping students from registering? Is it a $10 fee? Is it a $25 fee? Why are we not able to help them with that? What are our thresholds? So is it reasonable? We're losing more by preventing students from registering when they have a $50 debt than what we would be able to get by getting them back re-enrolled in the classroom, whether it's virtual or or in person, than what we're doing when we're not student friendly or student centered.
Absolutely. Sorrel, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Olivia and Yvonne were saying and share that we've had conversations this last fall with IR folks in all the different offices across segments. And we've learned a lot about, what questions people have, what they'd like to do with each other, the kinds of cooperation that would be useful, and so on. But one of the questions that comes up a lot, of course, that a shared question is, where are the students? The students who graduated from high school and never went to college, or the ones that went and didn't return? So, we really want to try to help answer some of those questions, and partner with Yvonne starting in January. We're working on another study to really get at that. Like, what are students doing instead? Some people were asking, they were wondering, did the Amazon, ads that advertise no degree necessary, did that influence the students? Is that what they're doing? Do they want to come back? What would it take to get them back? A lot of the things Olivia mentioned sound amazing. Do we need to do more of that? And would that do the trick? So I think, that it will be really interesting to learn more about what's currently happening for those students and really hearing from them, how can we make it possible? If college was what they wanted, how can we help facilitate that?
Thank you, Sorrel, for sharing that. Rachel, you quickly put your hand up.
Yeah, it's interesting as I've been like kind of thinking and rethinking about this idea. I always talk about, every student thinks they're coming in as psychology because they're the same thing they see on TV, right? And so every they get questioned, why aren't I in Psych 101? Because everybody has to take that class, right? If we could just name it, we have not lived up to students' expectations about what college is in the last 2 years. We haven't. Not all our fault as institutions, but what we have offered to students, especially if they're watching television, and I'm going to date myself with my reference, but if you think about Legally Blonde, right? She's at CSULA or whatever, UCLA or whatever campus she's supposed to be on. And it's a very specific glimpse into what college would be. Then she goes to Harvard, which is another very specific glimpse about what college would be. So if our students are making their decisions or understanding of college from these spaces, that's not the experience they would get on a campus, on my campus. And it's a different type of experience. It is still a full college experience. It's still an engaged experience, but they're expecting from that on-campus activity, student clubs and organizations, things that were very, very hard to do in the pandemic. And I think that then influences, right? The best advertisement you can get is word of mouth, right? And you tell 3 people if you've had a great experience, and you tell 7 people if you've had a bad experience, because that's the way word of mouth works. So how do we really kind of reframe and recover that piece of it? Because it also comes down to how then the students are framing their universe right now and what their priorities are within their family economies, their personal economies. There was this advertisement from Amazon that popped up on one of the games I played that says, college degree and careers without a college degree, right? College degree not required to have a really great career with Amazon. If that popped up for me, who, I work in San Bernardino, I live in Riverside. So this is the students are seeing this too, right? And their communities are seeing this too. So if a student says, I want to go to college, and mom and dad say, but this says you don't need a college degree to have a good career, how is that influencing their decisions? I know, we're really struggling to hire student employees on campus, and that has never been a problem for us as an institution before. But when we can offer a minimum wage salary, which in California isn't bad at $15, but the Del Taco down the street is offering $17.50 and Amazon's offering $21 an hour, we can't compete with that. And so if they're not coming to campus for class, they're not coming to campus for work, why would they come to campus? And so how are we rethinking about our digital footprint, our in-person footprint, and kind of the work that we're doing in this space? And I think one of the things that I would love for us as a region to be thinking about is the power of family engagement. And I think historically the higher ed sector has said, we don't want parents involved in this space. And I think we have to get over that. And we have a generational shift where parents are really, really critical. And I think about the number of parents in my campus community whose student comes to us first. Their student comes to us as a first generation student, but then the parent sees that student's experience and then comes to us for their degree later on in their kind of life. Like, how do we think about this space? Like, every high school first year student in both counties receives a trifold about the power of higher education that talks about the segments and the sectors in their mailbox, their physical mailbox, because while the student isn't checking that, the parents are. And so how are we thinking about that piece and really collaborating in that space? I think we're missing the boat there. So
I didn't raise my hand, but can I add something really quick to Rachel's?
Go ahead.
And students are desperate for these activities. We heard it at the beginning of the pandemic in that Student Voices project. Students were suggesting online sort of student groups, and they even had suggestions for how to do it. Like, instead of like English clubs, like you could have like writing clubs, you could have like gaming clubs, like ways that they can still have that college experience in a safe way. And, you know, adding the element of people are getting vaccinated means that, well, you can now add an element of some outdoor activities are safe now for group activities that aren't going to. So, I mean, students are desperate for it, and they've been desperate for it since the beginning of the pandemic.
Thank you, Yvonne. Emily, go for it.
Yeah, so I'm struggling with this one just a bit because you know, there's this picture that Rachel painted about how students see us in film and TV, and then they come to our spaces and it's not that exact experience, 110%. I do think that the pandemic has shifted how higher ed really needs to meet students where they are, going back to what Olivia was saying earlier. And I can just speak for UCR in this moment. We're struggling to really define what that is and what that looks like. Because as an R1 institution, our experience is, and the expectation is in person. Everything's in person. There's no remote classes. The experience is research, number one, hands-on, in person. And there's a piece of that students want, but there's a piece of that they don't anymore because they need flexibility. And I don't know that right now we're in a space to deliver that to them. And I think that there's an acknowledgement on the UCR campus that we need to start thinking differently about how we are meeting the students' needs and expectations differently while still maintaining what it means to be at the University of California. And as an institution and as a system, that's going to be a challenge for us. But we have to think differently about it, because if we don't, we're not going to be doing right by our student community.
Thank you, Emily. You know, it sounds to me, given the turn the conversation took a little bit, that it's almost more than an enrollment challenge. It's really much more a retention challenge for our students, is what this last few speakers have mentioned. And so I just don't know if others have other thoughts on that. We have people on the call who work in first year experiences and other spaces, as well as our, you know, K-12 partners, you know, thinking through, yeah, once you get there, how do we help to support them to stay, right? So curious if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
You know, John mentioned relevance. I think for sure we need to be relevant, to be culturally aware, to be sensitive, all of those things, right? And we just need to meet students where they are. And I know that's extremely challenging. Some of us have been doing this for a very long time, and we're still looking for answers, right? So just any insight, we do it a lot of times by trial and error, and we make mistakes, and we need to honor those and learn from them.
Thank you for that.
And Maria, I'd love to add to that.
Please go ahead, Angelica.
You know, that relevance is also about being timely with them, right? So I'm a Guided Pathways Regional Coordinator, so I have to say we have to have a path, right? I can't not say that, but we have to have a clear path that shows where they can get to, but also make it relevant so that it's not a long path that has these goals that I'm going to reach in 2 years and 4 years, because I am struggling for food and housing right now. So I have to make it relevant in that, okay, you can get a certificate along the way so that you can get a job that pays $17.50 an hour between now and then, right? So that you can build on the certificate, so that you can build on your studies, and your studies are relevant in that case, right? But being able to say to students, this is worth it, and that relevance, and being able to demonstrate that value. of the education, but not just in the long term, but also in the short term as well too, right? So getting those more immediate benefits of it, right? Especially since the generation that we're talking about as well too.
Thank you, Angelica, so much for chiming in. Appreciate it. One of the areas that came up significantly in the previous recorded conversations was around the transition points between segments, right? So we know we can do a better job of the handoffs between segments. And that is part of the things that GIA for sure has been trying to encourage as part of our conversations with different partners. And I know many of you have as well and have worked on this and done things to ensure that those handoffs are better and are actually taking action. However, there is always room for improvement. So if folks can think about, where else are we dropping the ball here on these connections between the segments that potentially we could, right, move forward as our homework after this call to think about how do we tackle this next one. And maybe there's even a couple quick fixes out there. It's possible. I mean, I know it's education, but it is possible. So if you have thoughts there, would love to hear them.
Can I just chime in real quick?
Please.
Sorry, my video is being super funky. I just started using a Mac. So anyways, I'm just wondering for anyone on this call, like, has anyone ever taken, let's just say, a list of 500 people that have dropped out of their colleges or universities in like the last 5 years? And have you sent them like a Survey Monkey or something where they just get this quick little text or email? And it's a simple question. Why did you drop out of school? And let them tell us why they left. And again, like, it could be something really simple. What is the number one reason you decided to end your studies? Financial reasons, you click on that link. Academic reasons, like, I don't know. So give them a few quick options, and maybe we give them an opportunity to tell us why they dropped out instead of us sitting here trying to figure out, what it is. Is it COVID? Is it financial reason? I mean, there could be any number of reasons, but I think if, again, we give them the opportunity to tell us, like, I think that changes data and the entire conversation.
I can't answer that question. Maybe others can, but I will say that, as I mentioned earlier, all of the conversations that we had this fall with partners in the region revolved around intersegmental work in a way that it has never come up as that primary in the past. And it was both around these conversations that they could be having, informal, sort of like what's happening, preview of the data, like not even student level, but just like give us a heads up what you're seeing so we can sort of know what to expect. But then also with the data. So people are saying, like, we want to know what happens to our students in more detail after they transfer. Like, if once we hand them off to the 4-year, both publics and privates, they mentioned, how are they doing? Did they graduate? Did they go on to go somewhere else? What did they major in? What was their GPA? What are their employment and wage outcomes? And of course, we do have limitations currently with sort of access to data, but some of that could be facilitated. And there seems to be a lot more of a desire for that than I've ever seen, going in all directions. And one thing that we've learned about is, as we sort of wait for this statewide data system, it sounds like there are best practices and models in other parts of the state that we could look into, that people have asked us to look into, like up in Fresno, where housed within the Fresno school district is a repository of 10 years worth of student raw data, and there's data sharing that goes across K-12 community college into the local 4-year, and they found that super helpful because community colleges and others, they can email the K-12 students directly, to let them know about things. The K-12s can know what happens to their student, just all of the benefits of that kind of data sharing. So something like that, would be a big project, but something that we could explore.
kind of respond to this question about kind of what happens when they leave. I mean, our students almost always and almost exclusively, they're in good standing when they leave. So they were able to re-enroll. What they tell us is that it's financial. However, they just say financial. That can be a whole host of different things within that idea of being financial. And it's interesting because we did some follow-up this year with not like how has COVID-19 impacted that reason for leaving. And students see COVID-19 as the disease at least in the responses we've seen, and not the impact on their family. And it's really sparked this really interesting conversation on our campus about if they see COVID-19 as a thing and not as an impact. But we know that what they're then telling us is that their world has been impacted pretty dramatically in the last 18 to 24 months. And a lot of that has to do with the financial outcome. So they had to step away, and this idea of their personal and family economy. And it has gotten me thinking about the regional swirl. It's really easy to shop our region when it comes to higher education. There's quite a few community colleges. I mean, we have 12 community colleges in San Bernardino and Riverside County that Cal State San Bernardino serves. We have 2 of the public four-year systems. We have a number of regional private institutions, and we've got some big out-of-state players who've made a pretty strong footprint into the broader region. And, if you haven't seen Arizona State's new beautiful downtown LA campus, that is also an impact in a region. So it's easy for a student to say, this isn't working for me right now for whatever reason. I'm going to respond in this way, but then I'm going to go take one class over here. So I'm going to take a class at San Bernardino Valley. I'm going to take 2 classes at CSUSB, and I'm going to take a class at Chafee because that's what works best for me right now. Because sometimes they don't leave, they also kind of drop units. And so that also has a different impact in kind of what they're thinking long-term and how this has become a priority and a job market that works in their favor right now. All of that is good, right? It's good for the student in being where they are. And so, I don't know, this feels like a bigger answer to a question that's maybe now actually a question. It's kind of like, how do we continue to capture that when we can't get to them? Because the other thing that happens when they leave is they stop answering our phone calls or change their number. I mean, the number of times we call those students on those lists, and then they, sorry, this number is no longer in service, or the person who picks up is like, oh no, yeah, no, that's not me. Whether that's actually them or not is a different story. But right, like how are we thinking about this kind of blanket communication around this space? When I think about even in our mass media in this region, when you think about over air television, but even like radio, most of those are not locally situated. Other than KVCR, we don't have a local television station that has mass media. We don't have local radio in that way. And so what are we even hearing about messages about our region that we're communicating broadly in these spaces? So that's not helpful, and probably more of a question than an answer, but things that are running through my brain at the moment.
I think it was helpful, Rachel. So all these comments are very useful. And, it actually brings up a really good point around not only swirling, but that regional fix that I think we all are in need of, because much of what we're facing in supporting students and families is around that regional lens, because they're not simply going to one campus, or they have these other needs, and we're really seeing that so much more than we ever have in the past. And so, I think that particular topic will continue to be a prime focus for what these regional conversations will be about. But I'm curious if there are thoughts both about the swirling question and others that we want to see where regional collaborations like GIA, maybe others that you're engaged in that we need to make sure are connecting, where does that greater collaboration for student success occur? And what is that? Like, what are your needs to help facilitate those things to continue? I mean, yes, we can continue to have Zoom calls and meet like this and share ideas and find those activities that we'll then have as homework after this call, because we're making a list. There's lots that's on it already. But really wanting to hear from you, where else is that space that would be of assistance to ensure that you're able to do your job even that much better because you're connecting to those other segments.
I think the collaboration, like you said, not just through Zoom, but the other place outside of GIA, of course, the CCGI, it brought the districts together. It kind of not only brought them together and said, here's information, but it did quite a bit of follow-up where you bring the individuals. It's one thing to be in a meeting sometimes and be able to just kind of click off and kind of disconnect and but be there, right? Technically be there, but not really be connected, versus when there's follow-up. And holy smokes, when I was at the CCGI meetings and I knew that email was going to come to my assistant superintendent, I needed to follow up on that piece to be able to explain. So it's those kind of pieces that then I would reach out to others, right, in my position at other districts and to see where they were at, what worked best for us. But being able to have that in person almost, and I don't know how doable it is nowadays, but that kind of almost forces districts, individuals to really have to take that next step action, right? That next piece. So for me, as you were mentioning that, I started thinking of what we do have out there. I know we work great with State San Bernardino and UC Riverside for the FAFSA completions, right? We know that FAFSA is an issue for many of our students. So we're trying to do the work on our end as to what can we do here, but we're having to reach out to our partners and say, we can only do so much work. If you're expecting us to have to answer questions, technical questions on someone's, when they put their social security number down and they're putting how much income they make, we can only take them so far. So really, almost an investment back into those outreach services. And I know they do great, but I also know that they're also spread pretty thin. So we're limited as to what days we can and can't provide these services. It's almost a reinvestment back into, programs like at our higher ed folks in their outreach so that we can have, an opportunity to be able to call on them and know that it's not going to be every time that we call them, they'll be present, but almost every time that they can definitely come down into their high school or to their program and be able to provide that service to them on, that given week or that given month. For us on our end, we're asking for additional support in K-12 with counselors, as an example. Right now, we know it can be done, right? We didn't say before the pandemic, hey, every kid should have a device one-on-one. Oh, well, that's not doable. A lot of districts would say it's just unfeasible. And then the pandemic hits and every kid now has a one-to-one device, right? I think that's going to support our higher ed partners, because if they need to have that flexibility, our kids are not going to be able to go into their campuses being more knowledgeable of how to, participate and be successful in an online course versus an in-person course, right? If the need be, arises. But that still has to occur with us in K-12. I think more of us investing then now in services for kids to deal with the college component of it. We're dealing right now, we brought in counselors. The state invested a lot of money, gave it to the districts to invest in additional services for SEL, social emotional learning. So we have that there, and we're addressing the social emotional. But what we also need to make sure that we're also addressing is that college and career going component of it too, because while we are focused on one, we're not necessarily providing the services on the other. And that kid might do well and graduate from a high school, but then that goes back to the question, are they then transitioning over to the colleges? And if the answer is no, it could more than likely be because we didn't provide the same equivalent of service and focus and efforts as we did for the SEL. So a reinvestment, at least in K-12, would be to provide additional counseling service and expansion of for that, a need to push those students to really kind of take that next step, make sure that they take the next step and have another step to take after that. They don't fall through the cracks. And so that they go from our high schools to the community colleges, our high schools to the 4 years, but that they also, and we're looking at that closely too, how many of our kids are actually transitioning into that second year too. So we're looking at, a clearinghouse data to figure out what percentage of our kids are truly transitioning over from one to the other. And then the question that we ask here in K-12 is, what role do we have to be able to support those students, right? And as Emily mentioned before, it's that financial literacy piece to make sure that we didn't only assist them in that summer after graduation, but that we provided that knowledge that they truly understand that they'll take with them once they officially leave us and start fall at their institutions too. So I think it's a reinvestment on different levels of those services, and we've done a great job to address this pandemic piece. We've done different things depending on the needs of the schools, but I think we've kind of put aside or put on the back burner the college going component of it. And for me, I know if I had additional support in that area, it would allow us to have those kind of conversations with our students, be able to provide. I think I heard someone mention that they didn't know if they could reach out to the counselor about questions regarding the college going process. And that's one of the hardest things, our caseloads, throughout the nation are just crazy high for school counselors. So if we really want to invest in this, then we got to invest in them too, and be able to kind of touch on that piece.
Thank you, Jorge, so much for those words. Wouldn't it be great to have had this meeting in person? Although weird, right? Because I don't know about you, but I've not really experienced that yet. And so I know but it's slowly coming back, and we're finding ways to engage. And however, you also made a really good point around potential, showing up with work that has to happen so you have those conversations with others. And so I think moving forward, I'm going to take that to heart and see how we can structure things of, bringing a couple data points, right? Or talking to two other colleagues and bringing that information back when we have a next conversation. Things that I think we can fairly simple, right? That we know that we can do. But it's funny, like it puts us back in the classroom as well, right? That you wouldn't have done it unless it was an assignment. And so we can figure out ways to think through this collaboration as necessary, so necessary for the success of our students in our region. I'm looking at the clock, and we had said that we were going to stick on around about an hour and a half to allow for the conversation, because we weren't sure exactly how it was going to go. And so I just want to ensure that we provide some time for if there were particular burning questions from anyone on the screen, whether you were had participated in one of the recorded sessions previously or are new to joining the group today. If you had a particular question you wanted asked, if you either want to vocalize it or put it in chat, would love to hear from you and provide you with a little space.
I don't have a question, but Jorge, if you need anything from Cal State San Bernardino, call me, email me, whatever you need to do, because we are here to support our RUSD students. And it doesn't matter. I don't even care if they're coming to us, they're going to community college, they're going to somewhere else. The reality is my job as a CSU is to make sure your students feel prepared to make that transition. And so we will call you back. I promise I will call or email you back when we get to that. And I cannot tell you how much my team is waiting to be allowed back onto the campuses and the high schools and stuff, because I know that's been a challenge, right? And we cannot wait to welcome your students back to our campus tour program. Like our campus tour guides are feeling really sad right now because they haven't had all the big group tours. So let me know how we can work together in that space, but please let me know if you need anything from us. I will find you a human to show up to where you need them to be.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. Yes, and let me just start off by saying, it's been fortunate in Riverside. Emily, my old boss, actually, when I was a student at Riverside, she's been great, and her staff for financial aid to admissions. Same thing, Rachel with San Bernardino is a great partners. Riverside City College, Laverne did an MOU with us and really kind of helped us really expose our students more. La Sierra in a lot of our private. So we've been very fortunate in that respect. And I think where I was going with this was that we also understand too that, we can't just expect to pick up the phone and, it's Tuesday and by Friday, we want you guys there to do a presentation to parents. So that's a conversation we continuously have with our sites to give themselves sufficient time to allow the flexibility. But, I appreciate all of you. And I'll probably be reaching out to you, Rachel, for some ideas I have.
Hey, if nothing else, that's an action item from this call. So I'll take it. Other thoughts or questions? I mean, I don't want to, this is a very important topic, but I also recognize being on Zoom for longer than an hour is hard, honestly. Like, let's just be honest, it's hard. And this is probably like our third or fourth meeting of the day, at least, right, in this virtual space. So I want to be conscientious of time that you all are giving, and don't want to lose some of the really important things that have come out of this conversation. I'm looking at the notes that Sorrel, and I'm sure Sorrel's been typing into our shared document that we prepared for this conversation. And so there's some homework things here. We have talking about a common application. Like what is that? What's possible there? Let's investigate that one. I'm interested in that. Rachel, you mentioned the power of family engagement. Yeah, we can certainly look more into that. Also, financial aid came up several times. Many of you may not be aware that GIA does help to facilitate a financial aid action network team, and they are really engaged right now on how are we doing more of the outreach to places that aren't always engaged in the financial aid process. And so if you're interested in joining that conversation, feel free to ping me after this call. We'll make sure to get you connected in that space as well. And then also, following up and the accountability to each other, right? So what does that look like, and how can we structure conversations like this in the future? So there is that follow-up and accountability to continue these really important regional conversations. So there's some of the things that we have listed that you mentioned, but would love to provide any other time for some insights or sharing of concluding remarks, things that you want to make sure that are out there, or things for us to research further in the future, or what other action step you're planning to take around this enrollment journey, what you're working on right now. There was a lot there. I'm sorry. I should do better at not loading in like several questions, but that's how my brain works. I apologize. John, you had something?
Just something to share. This is the first time that and it was funny just emailing Sorrel about this earlier. We've been, thanks to your support, been able to get Student Clearinghouse, Student Tracker going with many of our districts, and we're just down to the last one to sign. But once we have that, we'll be able to really look at data we haven't had before, as far as where our students are going and how they're doing when they get there. I think that's the key, and our counselors don't have that information. And if they're telling people, hey, let's go to this one because that's where all the kids go, but then they look at 2% or 3% actually are transferring out, they might want to look at, maybe a different option. But we've not had that data before with many of our districts. So to be able to provide a countywide view of this, as well as we created a little tool that kind of makes it easy to see and visualize real quickly, because the way they report it back isn't as easy. I think that's going to help our districts in our county at least really see where kids are going, how they're doing when they're there, and where students are being successful, and maybe they can route students to places where they can have a better chance of being successful. Because again, we're telling them we don't want to go, but we want to do more than just go. We want them to actually, graduate or be successful, or be a stepping stone to another thing, not just I got there and then now what. So that's one thing we're excited to do. We're actually getting that data, like it just was released like this week. So we're starting to download it and prep it and clean it up. So the next few weeks, we'll be sharing that with our districts throughout the county. So that's our next step.
Thank you, John, for bringing that up again. And I've been now with GIA, right, for almost 6 years, which is hard to believe. And the NSC data question with San Bernardino and Riverside counties was one of the first things that we were tackling 6 years ago. Finding funding to support districts, getting the right champions at the county offices, figuring out who had that information. And so, it has just been, it's a process, right? And then of course you throw in, things like budget constraints and pandemics and just overworked, so John, it just warms my heart. It's so exciting to hear. And I know you have put in so many hours to make that happen, but I'm really hopeful that information, not only for you personally at the county office, but also for so many of us in the region that can, get some of that, just aggregated and compiled data that will really help all of us to move forward in these spaces. So it's great news. Thank you, John, for sharing that. Angelica did actually have a question in the chat quickly that talked about retention strategies. I'm just going to read it word for word. Is there somewhere that institutions can learn retention strategies, promising practices that campuses have implemented, and so that folks can learn from and or contribute to? Is anyone aware of a space? Rachel, I don't know, you were answering maybe that question as well.
Yeah, the National Resource Center on the First Year Experience and Students in Transition, which is at the University of South Carolina, has for years been doing a lot of work in the FYE space specifically, but really I think has evolved over the course of maybe the last 10 to 15 years to be thinking about the transition space and really kind of how that happens from high school to 4-year, but also from 2-year to 4-year. In a way that has been, I think, really transformative for some of the conversations nationally. They are not deeply rich in community college experience. So I'm going to name that just because I think it's helpful context, because I know so many of you are in community college spaces, but I think this is also a really good focus. And a lot of their stuff is data driven. The other place is the Gardner Institute, also does a lot of this kind of data and work. And I know we're working with the Gardner Institute, with, I know San Bernardino Valley College in that space as well. But they also have some national resources in this space that could be potentially really helpful.
And one other that I would just add is you might have seen his name, Brandon Protis from Complete College America was on the call earlier, but he had something he had to run to. Well, many of you may not know or even realize, so that the Inland Empire is an alliance member as part of Complete College America, which means you have access to all of their resources. If you just go to their main website, you then can create a login for yourself. And they have a lot on first year experience and retention projects, and they're continuing that work. And you can also then reach out to us for some of direct connection to some of their fellows and other work with CCA. We continue to be strong partners, and they are planning to come out to do a really exciting workshop here in the early part of 2022. So we will be sharing more information on that once we get that moving forward. And as Sorrel mentioned in the chat, yes, Angelica, that's also something that GIA can add to our homework list, which is growing as it should. That's part of the reason for these calls too, is to see how we can then support all of you in the regional collaborative work.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to work with you all on that. I think that's something that the community colleges can really benefit from, but very specifically thinking of the how of the work as well too, right? For instance, just one example I can think of offhand are like the call campaigns, right? The call campaigns can be so beneficial, yet they're so time consuming. So what makes one call campaign more beneficial, more valuable than the other, right? What gives you more of that return of investment? And so there's some models, some colleges that are really showing some really good return for their time that they're putting in with students and those calls. What are they offering, right? What questions are they asking? What resources are they attaching to those phone calls? How do they train their staff, right? The very specifics on the how and those direct connections, I think is what I've seen in my experience that the colleges really benefit from. Yes, call campaigns is an amazing thing, but how? What exactly did you do? How did you get around that very specific nuance of it? And that how of the work, I think, is really important. So I've been compiling some stuff, some just really, I think actually, Anne-Marie, I think I recently even emailed you just notes of that. But I think that's one area that we're going to be really focusing on as Guided Pathways regional coordinators for this next semester. Since that's such a big focus for our colleges, but being able to provide the colleges that the operational pieces of that, right? And being able to make the connections to the colleges that are doing the work already that can give the very specific information. That's going to make the big difference, right? So yes, please keep me in mind.
Will do. And on that note, that feels like a good place to conclude for today. We've shared out some resources, we've shared out some ideas. We will put together some of our notes from this call, so that way then it's posted and make sure it goes out to everybody who has participated. So then you can also share it with your colleagues, because we know we all have very busy lives, and they may want to also listen to it later on. And as always, this is the first of many. It's not even really the first, right? We had some recorded conversations around enrollment, which were amazing. Thank you again for those of you who participated in them. And a huge thanks as well for being present in the call today. You've shared a lot of really great insights. And just what is always exciting for me in doing this personally is just how much you all care about students and the work that you do, and that it is influential on our students and our communities and our families in our region. And so just a big thank you. I don't know if I'll be seeing any of you before the holidays, so just wishing everyone also a very nice holiday season. Staying safe, everyone, I hope. And we will continue to follow up with this. And if things come up after this call that you wanted to make sure you shared out and you were like, oh, it just came to me, please reach out. We're here. That's the goal of GIA, as you all know, but really wishing you all great times in the next few weeks, as you hopefully also get some rest, because we've certainly all earned it, I think. So have a good day, everybody. Thank you.